Gentlemen, welcome back to the car hold. Another night, another project. What do we got here? We have the front sway bar off of my Gen 3. And, well, let's talk about that. This thing's been off for about 6 months. And people often ask, what's it like if you take off the sway bars? What's it like in terms of stability? And what's it like in terms of off-road performance? This is what I have to say. Coming from a Gen 2 to a Gen 3, a Gen 3 is more stable with both sway bars off than a Gen 2 with only the rear sway bar off. So, I find that the front sway bar is the more important one when it comes to controllability, especially on the highway. And that's just a testament to how much more stable of a platform the Gen 3 is than the Gen 2. That said, you're definitely gonna get more body roll. Like, you're going to notice that your sway bar has been removed, even if you just remove one. And I just removed the front one on the past 6 months. I've had a different Gen 3 that had both that I removed, but on my current Gen 3, just having the front removed, it makes a noticeable difference. And I'm leaning more towards going back to running the front on and removing the rear. In terms of off-road performance, you will gain about 1 inch of upward travel. Nothing crazy, but every bit in these vehicles with no articulation helps. But you're probably going to end up having that three-wheel action happen anyways, going to have the traction control. So I don't really know if having 1 more inch of compression really matters that much. So I'm gonna put it back on, gonna see if I like that more. Let's get to what we're doing today. Well, first of all, we're gonna replace the bushings. We've got the original ones. They are 15 years old, and so we're gonna replace that with the new Polytough ones that we just got in. And then, I don't know, I'm just looking at this, and the bar has got a lot of crud on it. Like, looks almost like tar from a roadway, and just a lot of built up stuff. And we are going to replace the end links. One of these was clicking, and that's why I originally took it off, because there was a clunk. If you have a clunk in your front end, the most common culprit, I want to say, are the sway bar end links. All right, as you can see, the bar looks a lot better now. I mean, the stuff was so thick. I think it was gear lube or oil or something that was dripping and being kicked back by the tires, or stuff on the road. Yeah, you can see just like all over the workbench the chunks of material that I was getting off. So I think I'm gonna paint it. I think I'm gonna hit it with a coat of paint. What's pretty amazing is how durable this finish is. I don't think it's just paint. It seems like it seems to go into the actual metal, almost like bluing. But what is amazing is to see that over time the sway bar bushing, where that was, has completely polished it all away. So, okay, I'm taking off the end links before painting it, and got that one off no problem. Just zipped it off with the torque wrench, or impact wrench, I mean. This one, though, is a really common problem when you turn the nut. You can see that inside, get out of the light, you can see that it's turning the rod on the inside. So what I've done, put the end link in a vise, then there's a hex key opening on both sides of the end link. The hex key goes in there, and so, I mean, there's really nothing to these end links. If you guys are looking to replace these, it's just one nut. This side goes on the vehicle, and there's a space for a hex key in there if the whole thing spins as you turn this nut. And same exact setup on the other side. That's it. So I'm going to put it in the vise, put this this Allen wrench on there so that it traps it, and then I figure I'll be able to hit this crescent wrench to break it free. Okay, that worked perfectly. You can see the hex key keeps the shaft from spinning because it's pinned up against the vise, and that allows the box wrench to get the nut. There's a tip for you guys. If you're going to be working on cars, if you're going to be a shade tree mechanic, or really fix anything, I think a vise has got to be in the top 5 tools that you need to have. It makes almost every project easier. And we're back. Freshly painted front sway bar. And let's talk about these little weird bushings here. I've never seen this before on any sway bar before. Usually it's just bushings that look like this, that go around the bar. The Gen 3 has these little ones on the side of it. I don't know if that was to keep the bushing from moving far enough away, but that doesn't make sense because it's trapped in here. Maybe it's to keep dirt from entering in this way, but then why don't they have one here as well? I have no idea what these are for. If anyone knows, please comment or send a DM. But I don't know if they were glued to the bar or they just, this one's on there really good. I don't know if it was glued or just became stuck after all these years. This one has, again, I don't think it's a rip. I think that's how you get them on, but this one's not attached anymore and it can slide around all over. So I don't really know what the point of it is. So I will probably tape it like that so it stays in place. And at the very least, if it does nothing else, it'll keep hopefully dirt from entering behind the bushing that way. And looking at the parts, we've got 2 new OEM end links. Something interesting about these end links that I've never seen before on a Mitsubishi part. Normally on Mitsubishi parts, the left side always comes first in your part number sequence. So the part number is identical. This one ends in 5. This one ends in 6. But this is the first time I've ever seen this. The 5, the one that should be the left, is the right side. And the 6 is the left side. It's, you know, does that mean anything? No. Someone made these part numbers on a Friday at 4:30 p.m. and mixed up the order or something. But I just found it kind of weird. And then for the new sway bar bushings, I'm going with the Poly Tough. These are 30 millimeter inner diameter size, the angled shape. So what does that all mean? To figure out what sway bar bushings you need to measure the diameter of the bar itself. Don't measure the inner diameter of your old bushing because this can open up and stretch out with time. So you want to measure the bar itself. And this one comes to 30 millimeters. I mean, the best way to do this is with a pair of digital calipers. Let me see. Got my little backup ones. Okay. Okay, see that? 30 millimeters. So that's what you guys want to do. There you go. Mitsubishi did not seem to have any sort of standardization when it came to sway bars and sway bar bushings from every gen. From Gen 1 through 3, they seem to all take at least a few different sizes of sway bar bushings, and even more confusing is there's a couple different shapes. So Polytough calls the shapes angled and straight. And I don't have a straight one with me tonight, but if you look on the Luso Overland website, you can see some examples of straight ones. But the angled ones, you can see here, that's angled right here. The base doesn't go all the way across. There's an angle there. So that's what they're calling angled. And some of them are way more pronounced than that. Some of them come up, and then there's like a big, almost like trapezoid, as opposed to this perfect half dome. So anything that's not a perfect half dome with a flat base is going to be called angled in the Polytough world, and the perfect half domes with a straight base, those are going to be called straights. So we measure the bar. We know we need 30. Another thing is sometimes if you still have your OEM bushing, Mitsubishi sometimes stamped the size in there, so you can see 30 right there. But again, don't measure the ID of the old bushing hole. That can throw you off. Now, what do you do if you measure the bar and you get a number that's not whole? You get 29.5. Would you go to a 30 or would you go to a 29? You would go for a 29. So if you're in between, I mean, it's going to be so hard to tell. We're talking about a fraction of a millimeter. But if that does happen to you, always round down, because you don't want this bar, you know, even though it's just going to be a tiny bit, you don't want it bouncing around inside that bushing. It's okay for the bushing to have to compress an extra ½ millimeter. 30 millimeters seems to be the most common size for front sway bar bushings on Gen 2s and Gen 3s so far. But we still have a very small sample size in the US. I think we've only gotten feedback from, I think, 6 or 7 vehicles, so very small sample size. And if you are watching this when it's being made, which is in June 2020, we don't really have much stock. I think we might have one more set of these sway bar bushings in stock, because right now what we're doing is we're testing. So we brought in a bunch of stuff. We brought in one of almost everything for all 3 generations of Monteros, but they're being tested. We've sent them out to guys all over the country, and they're installing them. They're reporting back to us. We're installing them, and we're collecting feedback, because even though these are legendary in Australia, I still want to feel comfortable knowing that they fit US Monteros, if there's some weird wacky thing where something's different, and just getting our impressions and know that they passed our test. So if you're watching this and it's a couple months down the road, then we'll probably have stock of everything and it won't be an issue. But just know that if you're watching this right now as I'm making it and you go to looseoverland.com, these might be out of stock. The size you need might be out of stock. The size you need may not even be listed on the website. So if that's the case, please send us a message so that we know that you have a Montero with a sway bar size that we didn't even have the part number created for yet because we hadn't experienced it. I think we might have 2 or 3 different part numbers for Gen 2 and Gen 3 front sway bars, but there could be 5, 6 different sizes. Lastly, the OEM end links are available on looseoverland.com for purchase. Let's get to it.
Okay, we have to take off the skid plate because this front sway bar, the bushing goes right in here, the bracket goes to those 2 bolt holes, and then the end link will eventually go over here. But we got to take the skid plate off, nothing to that. 2 12mm bolts, 2 13 millimeters here. Speaking of the skid plate, made in Arizona, adventure driven design. These skid plates are absolutely amazing. I had them, I had the full set on my Gen 2. I now have the full set on my Gen 3. My last Gen 3 had them. They're just great. I love them. They're stainless steel, so you don't have to worry about rusting. They're super strong. So I've got the transmission one, then the front diff one, then the radiator one. What else can I say other than, oh, a little cool piece of trivia. This vehicle, whose names most of you know, is Yoshi. Yoshi used to belong to Adventure Driven Design many moons ago before I bought it. And this was the vehicle that they used to design the Gen 3 skid. So it's kind of tough. This one's, the skid plate's really dirty, but there's like lines. It's really hard to see. There you go. You can see that. Get out of the way, coolant hose. See that line? This one's a little different. It's like scribed as they were figuring out where to bend it and where to do everything. And this is the first Gen 3. This was the Gen 3 that all of your skid plates came from. I have had the captured nuts get stripped out before on previous Monteros. So as a result, whenever I take the skid plate on or off, I always loosen it first by hand with a socket wrench before I put an impact or a gun on there. And same thing when I tighten them. I might get them, I like to get them actually started by hand. Then I could always zip them up pretty close and then tighten them by hand. That's why I like to do it, to be better safe than sorry, because if you strip those out, it's not fun.
Now you can see the mounts for the sway bar bushings.
and these were dirty, and I just cleaned them. So let's talk about the bushings real quick. There are 3 reasons why bushings squeak, and that's definitely something that poly bushings are more prone to. 3 reasons why they squeak. Number 1 is that there was a manufacturing defect, and that is by far the rarest one. Talking to Polytough, they could count on one hand that they think that a manufacturing defect was the result of was what caused the squeak. So probably not that. If it's a manufacturing defect, you should probably be able to see it with the naked eye. Number 2 is going to be grease. Not using the right kind of grease. So with Polytough, the bushings come with a packet of their grease, but if you run out, you need more. Any silicone or lithium-based grease will do. But if you use a grease that's not lithium or silicone-based, that can cause squeaks. Also, it can degrade the poly material. So staying on the topic of grease, the other one is not using enough grease. And there's 2 schools of thought to greasing, and I'll talk about that, in a little bit when I get to bushing, because I'm on the ground right now and I don't feel like getting up. And then the number 3 reason why a bushing can squeak is that the surface is improper installation, basically. And one of the things is that the surface here, and then of course on the sway bar in this case, was not cleaned, that it was contaminated, that there's dirt in there. So I just took, these were filthy. I just took a little bit of diesel on a brush, let that sit for a little while, then took like a little wire brush to it and some fine sandpaper on a sandpaper sponge. I've been cleaning a lot with diesel lately, and it just works so well, like so much better than degreasers and everything. Just a little bit of diesel fuel cleans it right up. Look at that. It's perfect. Perfectly clean. So that is the story on bushings. And I want to take a break right now because I just noticed something. You guys hear me talk about cross-check torque seal and what an awesome product it is, because you can mark something that you've replaced, like a bolt, in this case an alignment lower control arm bolt. You can see that it hasn't moved. You've marked it with a torque seal, and it's still on the control arm, and it's still on the face of the bolt. However, this is exactly why you do it. So you can inspect your vehicle really easily on critical parts. And look at that. You can see the seal has been broken, that it used to be right there, and that this bolt has shifted over. So that could be messing up my alignment. So I need to take it in, have that checked out. That is why we use it, because in 30 seconds you can look around your vehicle and be like, oh, is that bolt okay? Cool, my winch isn't starting to rip the bull bar off. Like, you can easily check the critical stuff on your vehicle. The sway bar is not marked what side is what or how it goes. There's 2 possible ways you might try installing it. So what you're looking for is for the bar to go up, and then your link comes down to the lower control arm. So that's what you're looking for. If you put them in backwards, this last piece of the arm will come down and it'll end up like right here. So sway bar arm is up, link comes down to the lower control arm. You can see that putting the bar on jack stands really close to where it's going to be mounted makes things real easy. So once you're sure you've got the right side on the right side and the left side on the left side, you can go ahead and I just put the end link finger tight with the bolt back here. The bolt that goes behind here to attach the end link to the bar, as well as this nut, I should say, gets torqued to 80 foot-pounds. So that's a lot of ugga-duggas. Not going to be able to get in here with a torque wrench. It's pretty tight. So I'm just putting the bar here to make sure that I know the right side is the right side, the left side is the left side, because these end links are side specific. And I didn't do any kind of markings when I took this sway bar off like 6 months ago. So that's why I had to kind of do this little test fit. So now I'm just going to take it off the jack stand, put it on the ground, and torque those to 80 foot-pounds. And then I can put it back, put that nut on, and torque that to 80 foot-pounds, as well as mount those brackets. Okay, when it comes to the bushings,
When you get your Polytough bushings, even though you measured your bar and the package looks right, just be sure to compare them. Make sure everything is the same. Look at that, perfect. So same shape, same inner diameter, and so we're good. Now, time to grease them. There's two schools of thoughts on grease. One school of thought when it comes to greasing bushings is bush every surface that comes in contact with metal. So in this case, the outside is going to come in contact with this bracket that's going to bolt it to the vehicle. So you would grease in here in this channel. And the bar, the actual sway bar, is going to go through here, so you would grease all around that. And you can even see that these Polytough ones are really cool. I don't know if I can show you. Let me get closer to this light. They're got a ton of knurling. Can you see that? To capture the grease. And that's where the bar is going to be, it's going to be pivoting and flexing in there. And so it's going to be moving about. So the inside, I think, is way more important, and the outside is more for a lot of times just to make it easier to fit the bushing into the bracket that it's going in. Not really an issue when your bracket comes off like that. But it also, can help with keeping other crap from getting in here, and also from keeping this surface from rusting. So I'm going to do a lighter coat in here, and then a thicker coat, get all of the pockets in the knurling. And the second school of thought when it comes to grease is that you only grease the surface that is getting a force applied to it. So in this case, the second school of thought would not put grease on this outside. They would install that part dry, and then this would be the only part that got grease, because that's where the force is going. I've seen both people do it, but I'm going with what Polytough and Super Pro and a lot of these other poly manufacturers suggest, and that's where there's metal contact. But I am going to go lighter on the coat on the outside and heavier where the force is being applied. As our Australian Pajero brothers say, this job is done and dusted. All put back together. Really easy job. I can't believe I managed to turn this into such a long video when I could have just said, take out that bolt, take out those two bolts, put in your new bushings, and you're done. But let's make it a little longer. Tips and tricks, final thoughts. Number one, be real careful when you've got your sway bar in here. This thing is really close to your oil cooler and these transmission cooler lines and your radiator, so just be careful when you're putting it into place. The torque spec on these bushing brackets is 33 foot-pounds plus or minus 7, so call it 35. And I know you guys are like, man, this guy's all about the torque specs. I know. I must have been like a Toyota owner in like a previous life or something. But I like torque specs, and it's a requirement when it comes to Polytough's warranty. That's, I talked about one of the reasons why bushings fail, and the third one was they weren't installed right. The surface wasn't cleaned, maybe the surface wasn't deburred, but also part of installation, they say, is the right torque spec. I mean, if the bushing is loose in there or too tight, you're going to have problems. So 35 foot-pounds on these, 80 foot-pounds on these. If you can't get your torque wrench on that bolt, it's just because your car wheels need to be moved. So you can see, if you just turn the wheel outward, you can easily get a torque wrench on that outside nut. I cleaned up the grease, the excess grease that had spilled out. I wiped that away so it doesn't attract dirt. And then this is the one that was ripped, that little, I mean, it's a bushing, but it's not a bushing that I can find in the Mitsubishi parts catalog as replaceable. So I guess it's part of the sway bar as one piece. And I just wrapped some Gorilla Tape around it to hold it in place right here next to the sway bar bushing. I think what these might be for is just to locate where the bar needs to go, because there's some play. It can move in and out. So maybe that's
just what it's for, to tell you where to mount it. I have no idea. If you know, let me know. That is it, you guys. Polytough bushings, OEM, end links. Gonna take this for a drive and see how she corners and how she feels. Thanks for watching.